Hello and welcome back to the Dragon's Waterfall, the channel where we discuss Saint Seiya, aka Knights of the Zodiac. Now today what I want to talk about is the differences between the original 1986 Saint Seiya anime and manga and the current Netflix remake. There are quite a lot of differences between the two shows, and they go far beyond the aesthetics and the look of the characters. Now, first and foremost, keep in mind that the original 1986 anime was created alongside the manga, so there are a lot of fewer episodes and there are a lot of differences between the manga and the anime. The Netflix series, in a way, is a lot closer to the manga, but it also adds a lot of changes, some of which are quite big, some of which are very small. Now, first and foremost, the most obvious thing is the setting. As I said, the original series took place in 1986. The actual year is stated a couple of times in the manga, and it's a little bit of an inside joke because it runs from 1986 to 1990, which is the same time as the manga was being created. So in a way it's like the manga was taking place in the real world at the time. This is no longer the case of course today, but the Netflix series doesn't have a definite date, a definite age, but it seems to be taking place in the current day, in about 2020. This is suggested by a few things, most likely when at the beginning of the first episode we see some street thugs or street boys recording Seiya's actions with a mobile phone, and obviously there's some kind of technology that didn't exist back in the 80s, but it's commonplace nowadays. Also, another difference between the two are the names. Now, it's common for anime and manga to be localized. A localization means that they change characters and various names so to make a series a little bit easier to understand on a certain market. Now, changing names is actually the very basics. Sometimes they would also change the contents of the dialogues. This was the case with the original series. Some more or less heavy, big changes were made across the world, but it's no longer the case with the Netflix series. The Netflix series did change the names of a lot of characters, but did not change the content of what they're saying, the meaning, the dialogues, and so on. This is much more common now in this day and age, where manga and anime are far more widespread than they were in the 80s and 90s, and so most dubbing companies prefer to keep the content as faithful as possible to the original. In terms of names, I mentioned it in a previous video that a few changes have been made. Seiya is still Seiya, but the rest of the main cast has different names depending on the country you're in. So the Dragon Knight, it's Shiryu in the original, but it's Fenlong in English. The Cygnus Knight is Hyoga in the original and Magnus in English. The Phoenix Knight is Ikki in Japanese and Nero in English. And finally, Andromeda is Shun in the original Japanese and Shon in English. Now, Shon or Shun is particularly important because possibly the biggest and certainly the most controversial change of the Netflix remake revolves around him or her. I say him or her because Shun throughout most of the franchise is a boy. He's the main cast, the main 5 Bronze Knights are 5 boys. And Shun has always been the most sensitive of the 5. He's a pacifist. He hates the idea of injuring others, and he would much rather die himself than having to kill someone. This is his most distinctive trait throughout the entire series, he repeatedly refuses to fight. He prefers to look for another option, and from time to time he even surrenders in a battle because he does not want to injure or possibly kill his enemy. Now, this has made the original Shun a very, in a way controversial, but also in a way popular character. He was something new back in the 80s and 90s, especially for a shonen main character, for a shonen protagonist. And he was seen by a lot of fans growing up basically as a different way that a boy, a male, could be a male. Very different from the more aggressive, sometimes bullish Seiya or Ikki. As I said, he was sensitive, he was delicate. It's often been surmised that he is homosexual, but this has never been explicitly discussed in the series. Really, sexuality is not something that Saint Seiya tends to discuss at all. Very few characters have girlfriends, and even when they do, the relationship is mostly platonic. It is, after all, a show for a younger audience. Shonen shows are usually aimed at boys between 8 and 13 maybe, and even though they can be watched and appreciated by an older audience, it does tend to be very vague, especially in regards to romance and relationships. So it's never been clearly stated what's Shun's sexuality. And he does have a female friend who sometimes the fans refer to as his girlfriend, who's the chameleon knight, June. But, you know, that's up to debate, basically, no one really knows. But regardless of his sexuality, which really is not important in his character, what does matter is that he's always been a sensitive, peaceful person. And as I mentioned before, he was very much loved by his fans because he offered a different way for a male to be a male, basically. He offered an alternative. Now, when the announcement was made that Shun was being changed into a girl, into Shon, there was an outcry, there was a lot of controversy, and things turned nasty a little bit because fans went on Twitter and they basically attacked, and there was a lot of hate speech against the main scriptwriter for the Netflix remake. So much so that he eventually decided to quit Twitter for a time, and I have no idea whether he's came back now or not yet. On his defense, he did say that he considered the original Shun an amazing character, so the new Shun was not meant to replace him, but rather to offer something else and to offer a character for girls to identify themselves with. Again, because in the original series there is not a real female main protagonist. Saori is in a way, but she's not one of the core five, and she's definitely not a warrior. So the idea behind changing Shun's sex was to, in a way, have a female warrior, a Captain Marvel, if you want, for girl fans to identify themselves with. However, it's still up to debate whether they changed the best possible character or not. It's been suggested that in a way it would have been much better probably to change sex to Shiryu or Ikki or Hyoga rather than to Shun, but regardless, that's what they did. Now, as I said, Shun's sex is the biggest difference, but definitely not the only one. The entire premise of the series is the same, but some of the, let's say, less important elements have been changed. For example, the Netflix series begins with the Golden Knight Reo Ayoria kidnapping Seiya's sister, Patricia, or Seika. This does not happen in the original manga. In the original series, Seiya is an orphan alongside his sister, and he basically gets kidnapped by Saori's grandfather because he wants to collect, we could say, 100 orphan boys, to send across the world so that some of them at least can become saints. It's quite true, it's quite cold-hearted, it will get explained later on in the series, but that's the way it is. In the original series, Patricia tries to find Seiya and disappears, and the mystery of her disappearance is one of the things driving Seiya forward throughout most of the 28 volumes of the manga. Here, in the Netflix series instead, she's kidnapped to begin with, so we don't really know what happened to her until something that's said later on, when it's implied that she died because she could not complete the training as a saint. This would mean that she also had a Cosmo, which is not something ever mentioned or discussed in the original Saint Seiya manga. Now, following this, in the Netflix series, Seiya lives in an orphanage, and that's the same also in the original series. But in the Netflix remake, he starts showing some of his Cosmo. Now this Cosmo gets recorded accidentally on a mobile phone, broadcasted on the internet, which is, typical for this day and age, and that's what alerts the Grado Foundation to Seiya. Instead, in the original series, nothing like this happens. Seiya just happens to be chosen as one of the possible 100 candidates to become a saint. The manga will eventually go more into details, saying that Seiya is actually one of Mitsumasa's children. Mitsumasa is Saori's adoptive brother. He's been renamed Alman in Netflix, if I remember correctly. And actually in the original manga, Seiya, Shiryu, Hyoga, Shun and Ikki all find out to be brothers, and they are all the children of Mitsumasa. We don't know whether this is the direction the Netflix series wants to take. It was quite controversial back then, and even the original anime didn't mention this at all, so it's possible that it will be swept under the rug right now. Now, moving on, another pretty big change, even though it may not look like it, regards Shaina. And Shaina is the teacher of Cassius who competes with Seiya for the Pegasus Curls. In the original series, Shaina wears a mask, and just like Marin, just like Seiya's teacher. And it is later explained that all female saints need to wear a mask, because that mask symbolizes refusing their sexuality, refusing their sex, being considered males, and it's absolutely forbidden for a female saint to have someone see their face. If someone does happen to see their face, the female saint either has to kill that person or to fall in love with them. This is the reason why Marin also has a mask, for example. It looks like the Netflix remake has completely cut this plot thread, even though it would become quite important for Seiya and Shaina later on. And that's why Shaina has those weird face paints in the Netflix series. They kind of aesthetically look a little bit like her mask, even though she does not actually wear a mask. And I'm not sure of the reason behind this change, but I suppose it was deemed a little bit too politically not correct to have female saints having to hide their faces and refuse to be considered women. Now, moving on, the Galaxian tournament, which is the big arena fight where Seiya fights against Shiri, for example. In the original series, it's a big event. It's something that Saori organizes publicly, and it's broadcast on the news and on TVs all over the world. Generally speaking, the existence of the Saints is not a secret in the original series, even though it looks like most people forget all about it later on as the story moves away from a more urban environment and moves towards a more remote and sometimes mythological setting. Instead, in the Netflix series, everything seems to be underground, quite literally, since it takes place, at least in the beginning, in what looks like an underground bunker, which does not exist in the original series at all. Now, another very big change is that of the Black Knights, the Black Saints. In the Netflix remake, the Black Saints have been created by science by Vander Gurad, who's also being helped by Phoenix Nero. However, in the original series, the Black Saints are basically like copycats of the main characters. They are also under the command of Phoenix Iki, but there is no involvement of Vander Gurad. In fact, Vander Gurad does not exist at all in either the original manga or in the anime. He is a Netflix original character, and it looks like what they wanted to do with him was to create another possible enemy, create a third party in the war between the main cast and the Sanctuary. I don't think this ended up working really well. For the most part, the fights against the Black Knights in the Netflix series are the more boring episodes, but this is what takes place. However, in the original, as I said, there are mainly 4 Black Saints. They are called the Black Four, not very original, and each and every one of them looks exactly the same as one of the main characters. So, for example, Black Pegasus is like Seiya with a black cloth, Black Andromeda is like Shun with a black cloth, and so on. And each of them fights against the respective main character and gets defeated by them. Their fights are quite violent, and for example, Black Cygnus takes off his own eyes. He cuts off his own eye to send it to Iki as a warning. Generally speaking, the original manga is much more gory, even in the original anime. The original anime was already a little bit less bloody and violent, even though there was still an awful lot of blood. And the Netflix series seems to have toned it down considerably. We hardly see any blood at all. And speaking of which, we go to the last big difference, which is the length of the series, how long the fights are. Originally, fights would last several episodes sometimes. You could easily have a battle last up to 3 or 4 episodes. It was quite unusual for a fight to only last one single episode, especially as the series progressed. Instead, the Knights of the Zodiac Netflix remake has made most of the fights far quicker. The most obvious case was Shiryu versus Argo Perseus, which used to take 2.5 episodes back then in the 80s, and only takes about 10 minutes, or probably even less than that, about 5 minutes now. And this is something that has not gone down well with the fans, because it seems to take away some of the epics in the series. This is mostly it. There are also some changes in the story itself. Now keep in mind that what we've seen so far is not the complete Netflix series. We've only seen the first season, which was split into 2 halves, so we don't really know how much further the show will go on. The original series ran 4 main arcs. There was everything that was before the Sanctuary, then the Sanctuary arc with the 12 Zodiac Palaces, which is the most popular and famous arc in the manga. Then there's the Poseidon arc and the Hades arc. The original anime also added the Asgard arc, which is a filler, even though it's quite beloved by most fans. We don't know what the Netflix remake intends to do, but the first season ends pretty much like the original first, everything that took place before the Sanctuary arc, really. So it's possible that things will go on will continue in similar fashion. And this is it, really. This in a nutshell are the main differences between the original manga and the current Netflix series. I may be doing some episode by episode reviews later on, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure mainly because it's been a while now since they went up on Netflix, so there may not be a lot of interest, but if you'd like to see them, if you'd like me to talk more about how each episode is different from the original and what took place in the original, then feel free to comment down below and I'll think about it. And now, as usual, if you like the channel, join, subscribe, hit the notification bell, spread the word, talk about Saint Seiya and the Knights of the Zodiac with your friends, make sure they get to know it, and I will see you all soon. Bye bye.